Cop secretly follows lost dog, then he bursts into tears when he sees. Officer Daniel Reynolds had seen a lot in his years on the force. He had dealt with criminals, comforted victims, and even helped reunite lost pets with their owners. But nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to witness on this cold, misty evening. It all started with a simple call from an elderly woman named Margaret who reported a stray dog wandering the streets. "He looks lost, poor thing," she had told dispatch. "He's got the saddest eyes I've ever seen." Reynolds had just finished a routine patrol when the call came through, so he decided to check it out. When he arrived at the location, he spotted the dog right away. A medium-sized Labrador mix with patches of dirt on his fur. The dog looked like he had been wandering for quite some time. But something about him caught Reynolds' attention. This wasn't just any lost dog. The way the animal moved, pausing at every intersection and looking around as if searching for something, made it clear he had a purpose. Instead of immediately trying to capture the dog, Reynolds decided to follow him. He turned off his sirens and lights, keeping a safe distance in his patrol car. The dog continued moving, occasionally stopping to sniff the air before pressing on with determination. For nearly an hour, the dog led Reynolds through winding streets, abandoned lots, and quieter neighborhoods. The deeper they went, the more the officer's curiosity grew. What was this dog looking for? Or more importantly, who? Finally, they reached an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. The dog hesitated for a moment, his tail wagging anxiously before he bolted inside through a small opening in the rusted metal door. Reynolds parked his car and followed on foot, his heart pounding as he unholstered his flashlight. The inside of the warehouse was dark and musty, filled with crates and debris. He could hear the dog whimpering somewhere up ahead. As he moved cautiously through the space, his flashlight beam landed on something that made his breath catch in his throat. There, curled up in a corner behind an overturned crate, was a little boy, no older than 6 or 7. His clothes were dirty, his cheeks streaked with dried tears, and he clutched onto the dog as if he were his only source of comfort. Reynolds immediately called for backup and slowly approached. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, kneeling down. "It's okay. You're safe now." The boy looked up, his eyes wide with fear, but the dog nuzzled him reassuringly. It was then that Reynolds noticed a faded tag on the dog's collar. It read, "Max, if found, return to Tommy." The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This dog hadn't been lost, he had been searching. Searching for his owner, a little boy who had somehow ended up alone and frightened in this cold, empty warehouse. Tears welled up in Reynolds' eyes as he gently reached out. "Tommy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Max found you." The boy let out a shaky breath before whispering, "Max never leaves me." Reynolds swallowed hard, overcome by the loyalty and love between the two. As his colleagues arrived and medical personnel assessed the child, the officer couldn't help but kneel beside Max, scratching behind his ears. "You're a hero, buddy," he murmured. That night, Tommy was taken to the hospital to recover from dehydration and mild hypothermia, while Max was given a warm bath and plenty of food at the station. Later, investigators discovered that Tommy had gone missing from his home nearly 3 days earlier after wandering off. His single mother had been frantically searching for him, and when she was finally reunited with her son, she collapsed in grateful sobs, holding both Tommy and Max tightly. As for Officer Reynolds, he never forgot that night, the night he followed a lost dog, only to discover a story of unbreakable love and devotion. And from that day forward, he always believed that sometimes the best officers didn't wear a badge, they simply had 4 legs and an unshakable heart. After the emotional reunion, Officer Daniel Reynolds couldn't stop thinking about Max and Tommy. Even though the boy was safe in the hospital and his mother, Lisa, was holding him tightly, something about the situation felt unfinished. The way Max had persistently searched for Tommy suggested something deeper. This wasn't just a case of a lost child. Something had led Tommy to that abandoned warehouse. And Reynolds wanted to find out what. That night, after finishing his shift, he returned to the warehouse. It had been a long day, but his gut told him there was more to uncover. Using his flashlight, he carefully examined the area where Tommy had been found. The cold air hung heavy, and the sound of dripping water echoed through the empty space. As he looked around, he noticed small footprints in the dust. Tommy's. But what caught his attention even more were a second set of footprints, much larger. Reynolds' stomach tightened. Someone else had been here. The prints led toward a dark corridor at the back of the warehouse, partially hidden by an old, rotting wooden crate. He pushed it aside and found a metal door slightly ajar. His pulse quickened. He wasn't alone. Slowly, he stepped inside, his hand instinctively resting on his holster. The room beyond was dimly lit by a single, flickering bulb. It smelled of mold and gasoline. Stacks of crates lined the walls, and in the center of the room sat an old, tattered mattress. Nearby, a pile of discarded fast food wrappers and an empty water bottle suggested someone had been living here. Then, a noise. A faint shuffle came from behind one of the crates. Reynolds tightened his grip on his flashlight and stepped forward. "Police," he called out. "If someone's here, show yourself." For a long moment, there was silence. Then, a figure emerged, a man in his late 50s, his face weathered, his clothes stained with dirt and sweat. His eyes darted around, calculating his next move. "Who are you?" Reynolds demanded. The man licked his dry lips happily, but didn't answer. Instead, his gaze flicked toward the door, as if considering escape. Reynolds took a step closer. "You were here when the boy was found, weren't you?" The man hesitated, then finally muttered, "Didn't hurt him." His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. Reynolds studied him carefully. He didn't seem violent, but something about him put the officer on edge. "Then what were you doing here?" The man sighed and sat down on the mattress, rubbing his hands together. "I found him wandering near the highway," he admitted. "Kid looked lost. Scared. I was gonna take him somewhere safe, but then, I got scared too." Reynolds narrowed his eyes. "Why would you be scared of helping a child?" The man hesitated before finally whispering, "Because I got a record." Reynolds felt a shift in the air. He had dealt with people like this before, those who had made mistakes in the past and lived in fear of being judged for them forever. But this wasn't about the man. This was about Tommy. "You found him by the highway," Reynolds repeated, trying to piece everything together. "Then why didn't you call the police?" The man shook his head. "Didn't have a phone. And when I tried to wave down a car, no one stopped. People see someone like me, they don't stop." Reynolds exhaled. The man had made a bad choice by not getting help immediately, but something told him he wasn't lying. He had taken Tommy to the warehouse, given him food, and kept him safe, but fear had kept him from doing the right thing. "Where were you when I found Tommy?" Reynolds asked. "Hidden." The man looked down at his hands. "He had his dog. I figured the dog would take care of him better than I could." Reynolds took a deep breath. He had a choice to make: arrest the man for not reporting the lost child, or recognize that sometimes people make mistakes for complicated reasons. Finally, he stood up straight. "What's your name?" The man looked startled by the question, as if he hadn't been asked in a long time. "Charlie." "Charlie, I'm not here to arrest you," Reynolds said. "But you need to come with me and explain this to my department. If you're telling the truth, you might have saved that boy's life." Charlie looked uncertain, but after a long pause, he finally nodded. "Okay." Back at the station, Reynolds spoke to his captain and explained the situation. Background checks confirmed that Charlie had a past, small thefts, minor offenses, but nothing violent. After speaking with Tommy, the truth was clear: Charlie had helped him, not harmed him. Despite his fears, Charlie was released without charges, though the department referred him to a local shelter for assistance. As for Tommy, he made a full recovery. His mother, Lisa, couldn't stop thanking Officer Reynolds for bringing him home. But the real hero, in Tommy's eyes, was Max. A few weeks later, Reynolds visited their home to check in. When he knocked on the door, Tommy answered, his face lighting up with a big smile. "Officer Reynolds," he cheered, hugging Max tightly. Reynolds smiled. "How's my favorite hero dog doing?" Max wagged his tail. Lisa stepped out, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "We actually have something for you," she said with a grin. Tommy ran inside and came back holding a framed drawing. It was a picture of Officer Reynolds, Max, and Tommy, all standing together. At the bottom, written in shaky letters, were the words, "Thank you for following Max." Reynolds felt his throat tighten. He knelt down, ruffling Tommy's hair. "This means a lot to me, buddy." That night, as he drove home, he glanced at the drawing on his passenger seat and smiled. It was a reminder that sometimes the simplest choices, a lost dog, a quiet pursuit, a leap of faith, could lead to the most unexpected miracles. And in his heart, he knew that he would never forget the night he followed Max into the unknown and found something truly extraordinary. Officer Daniel Reynolds thought that night had ended with a miracle, the safe return of Tommy and his loyal dog Maximum. But deep down, something still gnawed at him. The way Tommy had been found, the fear in his eyes, and the abandoned warehouse, none of it sat right. The case was closed, but Reynolds knew there was more to the story. The next morning, he sat at his desk, staring at the case file. His gut told him there was something missing. He picked up his phone and called Lisa, Tommy's mother. "Lisa, it's Officer Reynolds. How's Tommy doing?" "He's doing much better, thank you," Lisa replied, her voice filled with gratitude. "He's been sleeping with Max every night. I don't know what we would have done without you." Reynolds smiled but quickly got to the point. "Lisa, I need to ask, has Tommy told you anything about how he ended up at that warehouse?" There was a long pause. Then Lisa sighed. "No. Every time I ask, he shuts down. He says he doesn't remember, but I can tell he's scared." Reynolds' jaw tightened. Tommy wasn't just lost. Something had happened. And if Tommy was too scared to talk, then someone had put that fear in him. "I want to come by and talk to him," Reynolds said. "Gently, of course. I think there's more to this." Lisa hesitated, but finally agreed. "All right. If you think it'll help." The truth begins to unfold. That evening, Reynolds pulled up to their small home. Max barked excitedly from the window as he knocked on the door. Lisa welcomed him inside, leading him to the living room where Tommy was sitting on the floor, coloring a picture of Max. "Hey, champ," Reynolds greeted, kneeling beside him. "That's a great drawing." Tommy smiled shyly but didn't say anything. Reynolds sat on the floor, leaning against the couch. "You know, I was thinking about how you and Max found that warehouse. It's a big city. That's a strange place for a little guy like you to end up, huh?" Tommy's coloring slowed. He didn't look up. "I just want to understand," Reynolds continued gently. "Nobody's mad at you, Tommy. We just want to make sure you're safe." The boy's grip on the crayon tightened. Then, in a barely audible whisper, he said, "I didn't get lost." Reynolds felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" Tommy hesitated, then finally looked up. "A man took me." Lisa gasped, covering her mouth. Reynolds felt his blood turn to ice. "Tommy, can you tell me about this man? Anything you remember?" Tommy nodded slowly. "He had a van. It was white. He told me my mom sent him to pick me up." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "Oh my God." Reynolds kept his voice calm, though his pulse was racing. "And then what happened, buddy?" "I got in, but..." Max started barking. He was really mad. Tommy sniffled. "The man got scared and stopped the van. He tried to grab me, but Max bit his arm. I ran out, and Max chased him away. Then we just kept running and running until we got to that big empty place." Reynolds clenched his fists. This wasn't just a missing child case, this was an attempted abduction. "You did the right thing, Tommy," he said, his voice steady. "You and Max are very brave." Lisa was sobbing now, hugging her son tightly. "I had no idea," she whispered. "I thought he wandered off. I thought..." "It's okay," Reynolds assured her. "But we need to find this man before he tries to take another child." The hunt begins. Reynolds immediately contacted the department, reporting what he had just learned. Within hours, an alert was sent out to patrol units, looking for any vans matching Tommy's description. Meanwhile, Reynolds pulled every surveillance camera feed he could from the area where Tommy had disappeared. It wasn't long before they found something. A traffic camera had captured a grainy image of a white van speeding down a side street, just a few blocks from Tommy's house, on the night he went missing. Enhancing the image, they managed to get a partial plate number. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Reynolds worked through the night, cross-referencing vehicle registrations until he found a match. The van belonged to a man named Raymond Carter, a drifter with a long history of petty crimes, including a past arrest for attempting to lure a child into his car. Reynolds' stomach churned. This was their guy. Closing in. By morning, a task force was assembled. Officers were sent to stake out Carter's last known address, a run-down trailer park on the outskirts of town. When they arrived, the van was nowhere in sight. But that didn't mean Carter wasn't close. Reynolds knocked on the door. No answer. He signaled to his team, and within moments, they forced their way inside. The trailer reeked of cigarette smoke and rotting food. Scattered on the table were newspapers with missing children reports circled in red marker. And then, in the corner of the room, Reynolds saw something that made his skin crawl, a collection of small children's toys, lined up neatly on a dusty shelf. Carter had done this before. Before Reynolds could react, a loud engine roared outside. Through the window, he saw the white van speeding away. His running. The chase was on. Reynolds and his team jumped into their cruisers, sirens blaring as they pursued the van down the highway. Carter swerved recklessly, nearly hitting a truck before veering onto a dirt road leading into the woods. "He's cornering himself," Reynolds muttered. "He's got nowhere to go." Sure enough, a few minutes later, the van skidded to a stop at a dead-end clearing. Carter flung the door open, making a break for the trees. Reynolds jumped out of his car, sprinting after him. "Stop! Police!" Carter was fast, but Reynolds was faster. Within moments, he tackled him to the ground, pinning his arms behind his back. "It's over, Carter," he growled. "You're not hurting another child." The man thrashed, but it was useless. Within minutes, backup arrived, and Carter was cuffed and hauled into the squad car. Justice for Tommy. That night, Reynolds stood outside Tommy's house once again. Lisa opened the door, looking anxious. "Did you find him?" Reynolds nodded. "He's in custody. He won't be hurting anyone ever again." Lisa's eyes welled up with relief as she hugged him. "Thank you," she whispered. Tommy appeared behind her, peeking out shyly. Max stood beside him, wagging his tail. Reynolds crouched down. "Guess what, buddy? Because of you and Max, we caught the bad guy." Tommy smiled for the first time since the ordeal began. "Really?" "Really," Reynolds confirmed. Tommy hugged Max tightly. "We did it, Max." As Reynolds walked back to his car, he looked at Max one last time and gave him a salute. "You're one hell of a partner, buddy." Max barked in response, his tail wagging furiously. And in that moment, Reynolds knew, this wasn't just a case he had solved. This was a bond he would never forget. Officer Daniel Reynolds thought the case was over. Raymond Carter had been caught. Tommy was safe. The nightmare had ended. Or so he thought. A week after Carter's arrest, Reynolds received a call from his captain. "Reynolds, I need you in my office. Now." Something in his voice sent a chill down Reynolds' spine. He hurried to the office, where Captain Harris tossed a file onto the desk. "Take a look." Reynolds opened the file, and his stomach dropped. Inside were photos, surveillance images from a different town, nearly 300 miles away. Each photo showed the same white van. The dates on the photos were recent, just weeks before Carter had tried to take Tommy. But what really sent shivers down Reynolds' spine was the fact that in one of the images, a different man was driving the van. "What the hell?" Reynolds muttered. Harris nodded. "It's bigger than Carter. We ran the van's plates against traffic cameras across multiple states. That vehicle has been spotted in 3 different cities over the last 6 months. And each time, a different man was driving it." Reynolds clenched his jaw. "Are we saying Carter wasn't acting alone?" Harris exhaled. "That's exactly what we're saying." A darker truth. Reynolds felt his pulse quicken. If Carter wasn't working alone, that meant there were others who were still out there, possibly still looking for their next victim. He flipped through the file again, stopping on a report from a detective in Arizona. A child had gone missing under eerily similar circumstances. A white van. A man pretending to know the child's family. And then, vanished. The boy had never been found. Reynolds shut the file, his hands gripping the edges. I want in on this. Harris nodded. I thought you'd say that. Pack your bags. You're heading to Arizona. The investigation expands. Within 24 hours, Reynolds was on a plane, his mind racing. If this was an organized group, some kind of ring, then Carter had just been a small part of something much bigger. When he arrived in Phoenix, he was met by Detective Sarah Lawson, the officer who had been working the missing child case. She wasted no time. We've been tracking this for a while, she said as they drove to the precinct. We have reason to believe this isn't just a one-off case. There have been multiple disappearances with similar patterns. Reynolds listened intently. And Carter's van? Lawson nodded. The same van was seen near at least 2 of these cases. But like you saw in your town, Carter wasn't the only driver. Reynolds clenched his jaw. Then we're dealing with a network. Exactly. Lawson pulled into the precinct parking lot, leading Reynolds inside. She handed him another folder, filled with more photos and reports. Reynolds scanned them quickly, his gut twisting. This was worse than he had imagined. We believe they're targeting small towns and low-income areas, Lawson explained. Places where they think parents won't have the resources to push an investigation too hard. Reynolds shut the file and looked up at her. They didn't count on us. A dangerous game. The next step was clear, they needed to track down the other men linked to the van. And that meant finding Carter's contacts. Reynolds and Lawson arranged for an interview with Carter, who was being held in a high-security facility. When they entered the interrogation room, Carter was already seated, his hands cuffed to the table. He looked up at Reynolds and smirked. Well, if it isn't my favorite cop. Reynolds didn't waste time. Who else is in on this? Carter chuckled, leaning back in his chair. You really think I'm gonna tell you that? Reynolds slammed a photo onto the table. It was one of the missing kids from Arizona. This boy never made it home. You think that's funny? For a split second, something flickered in Carter's expression. Guilt. Hesitation. But then, he smirked again. You're barking up the wrong tree, officer. I was just a driver. Reynolds' temper flared, but Lawson put a hand on his arm, signaling him to hold back. She leaned in. You know we already have enough on you to put you away forever, right? But if you help us, if you give us names, you might not rot in a cell for the rest of your life. Carter hesitated. His eyes darted between them, calculating. Then, finally, he leaned forward and whispered, You're wasting your time. Reynolds frowned. Why? Carter's smirk returned. Because they're already planning their next move. The clock is ticking. Reynolds and Lawson exchanged a glance. If Carter was telling the truth, that meant there was another child in danger. Lawson didn't waste a second. She rushed out of the room to make calls, activating every available resource. Reynolds stayed behind, staring Carter down. What do you mean by that? He demanded. Carter just grinned. You'll find out soon enough. Reynolds clenched his fists, forcing. Officer Daniel Reynolds stared at Raymond Carter, his fists clenched under the table. Every second wasted was another second a child could be in danger. Carter's smirk was infuriating, but Reynolds refused to let anger cloud his judgment. You think this is a game? Reynolds growled. We know you weren't working alone. You give us names, and maybe, just maybe, you don't spend the rest of your life in solitary confinement. Carter exhaled through his nose, leaning back in his chair. You're acting like I'm the one in control here. He shook his head with a dark chuckle. You don't get it, do you? They're always watching. Reynolds narrowed his eyes. Who? Carter leaned forward, his smirk fading. You think I'm scared of you? You should be scared of them. Before Reynolds could press further, the door burst open. Detective Sarah Lawson stood there, her face pale. We've got a problem. Reynolds shot Carter a warning glance before following Lawson into the hallway. What is it? Lawson handed him her phone. A security camera still was displayed on the screen, A grainy image from a gas station in a town just 50 miles away. A white van had been captured on camera just hours ago. Reynolds' stomach twisted. They're still out there. The race against time. Lawson didn't waste a second. We need to move. The plate matches the same van Carter used, but the driver's different. If they're still active, that means they could already have another target. Reynolds turned back to the interrogation room, glaring at Carter through the one-way mirror. The criminal was still sitting there, completely calm, as if none of this concerned him. "Forget him," Lawson said. "We'll find them without his help." Reynolds knew she was right. He followed her to the operations center, where officers were already tracking the van's movements. The last known sighting placed it near a small elementary school in the town of Willow Creek. "Call the local department," Reynolds ordered. "Get every available unit on this." Within minutes, a statewide alert was issued, and Reynolds and Lawson jumped into their car, speeding toward Willow Creek. Every second counted. As they drove, Lawson checked the GPS. If they were last seen near the school, they might be watching it. Or worse, they might have already grabbed a kid. Reynolds gritted his teeth. "Not on my watch." A deadly trap. When they arrived in Willow Creek, the local sheriff was already waiting for them. Sheriff Tom Briggs was a grizzled veteran, his sharp eyes scanning the street. "We spotted the van near the park," Briggs informed them. "But by the time we got there, it was gone." Reynolds' mind raced. Did anyone see the driver? Briggs nodded grimly. A couple of kids said they saw a man sitting in the van, watching them. But when they got too close, he drove off. Reynolds exchanged a glance with Lawson. This was the same method Carter had used: stalking, waiting, watching. "They're planning something," Lawson muttered. Briggs rubbed his chin. "I've already got my deputies patrolling, but this is a small town. If they're hiding out, it won't take long to find them." Reynolds scanned the area. The streets were quiet. Too quiet. Something felt off. And then, a scream echoed from the alley behind a row of small shops. Reynolds didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the sound, his heart pounding. The rescue. As Reynolds rounded the corner, he spotted the van, its side door partially open. A young girl, no older than 7, was kicking and screaming as a man tried to pull her inside. "Police! Let her go!" Reynolds bellowed, drawing his weapon. The man froze for a split second before shoving the girl away and diving into the driver's seat. "Get the plates!" Lawson shouted, running to the child. Reynolds aimed at the van's tires, firing 2 precise shots. The back tire exploded, sending the vehicle skidding. But the driver didn't stop. He forced the van onto the road, sparks flying as the rim scraped against the pavement. Briggs and his deputies were already blocking the exit. The van swerved hard, crashing into a telephone pole. Reynolds sprinted toward the wreckage, weapon drawn. The driver was trying to crawl out of the shattered windshield. His face was bloody, but his eyes burned with pure hatred. "Stay down!" Reynolds barked, pinning him to the ground. Lawson and Briggs rushed over, securing the suspect in cuffs. He thrashed, cursing, but it was over. Nearby, the little girl was sobbing in her mother's arms. "He tried to take me," she whispered, clinging to her mother's coat. Reynolds exhaled, his hands still shaking. They had stopped him, but how many more were still out there? Unraveling the network. Back at the station, they ran the suspect's prints. His name was Ethan Voss, a known associate of Carter's. He had a history of minor crimes but had never been caught for anything this serious. Reynolds stared at the screen. If he and Carter were connected, that means there's a bigger network at play. Lawson nodded grimly. "We need to interrogate him." But unlike Carter, Voss didn't play games. The moment he sat down, he started talking. "This is bigger than you think," he muttered. "Carter was just a recruiter. There are more of us." Reynolds leaned in. "How many?" Voss hesitated. Then, in a whisper, he said, "Dozens." Reynolds felt a cold chill run down his spine. Voss smirked. "You think you've stopped us? This is just the beginning. The war begins." Reynolds knew now that this wasn't just a single case, It was a nationwide operation. Carter and Voss were just foot soldiers in a much larger scheme. And the worst part? They weren't afraid. They believed their network was untouchable. That no matter how many officers got involved, they would always be one step ahead. But they had underestimated one thing. Daniel Reynolds wasn't going to stop until every last one of them was behind bars. As he walked out of the interrogation room, Lawson looked at him. What now? Reynolds' jaw tightened. Now. We tear this whole thing apart. Officer Daniel Reynolds knew this was far from over. The arrest of Ethan Voss had given them a lead, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. If there were dozens more involved in this human trafficking ring, then every minute counted. Back at the station, Reynolds and Detective Sarah Lawson pored over files, piecing together connections. Voss had mentioned that Carter was a recruiter, someone who lured children in before handing them off. That meant there had to be buyers, middlemen, and coordinators, people who ensured the operation ran smoothly. We need to break him, Lawson muttered, staring at the two-way mirror as Voss sat in the interrogation room, smug despite being handcuffed. He's already cracked once. He'll do it again. Reynolds nodded. He thinks he's in control. We need to make him feel like he's losing. They re-entered the room. Reynolds dropped a thick file onto the table, letting the impact echo through the silent space. Ethan, you're looking at life. No deals, no way out. But if you help us, maybe, just maybe, you get to see the outside world again. Voss chuckled. You don't get it, do you? If I talk, I'm dead. Lawson leaned in. You're already dead to them, Ethan. You got caught. The second they find out, they'll erase you. You're a liability. Voss twitched, his confidence faltering for the first time. Reynolds pressed on. But we can protect you. Give us names. Locations. Anything. Voss exhaled sharply, running a hand through his greasy hair. All right, he muttered. But you didn't hear this from me. The safe house. Voss gave them an address, an old farmhouse just outside of town. According to him, it was a safe house where trafficked children were temporarily held before being moved elsewhere. Reynolds wasted no time. Within the hour, a full tactical team was assembled, ready to raid the location. As they drove through the dark countryside, adrenaline coursed through Reynolds' veins. If Voss was telling the truth, they could be walking into a major rescue operation. But if it was a trap, they had no idea what awaited them. The farmhouse loomed ahead, its windows dark. No movement. No signs of life. Thermal imaging shows heat signatures inside, a SWAT officer reported through his headset. Multiple figures. Some small, possibly children. Reynolds' grip on his weapon tightened. This was it. Move in, he ordered. The raid. The team approached in silence, surrounding the building. On Reynolds' signal, they breached the front door. Police. Hands in the air. Chaos erupted. Men inside scrambled, some reaching for weapons. Shots were fired, but the tactical team was faster. Within seconds, 3 suspects were tackled to the ground and restrained. Reynolds rushed past them, heart pounding as he kicked open a locked door. Inside, huddled together in the darkness, were 4 children, their eyes wide with fear. You're safe now, Reynolds whispered, kneeling beside them. We've got you. Tears streamed down their faces as officers carefully led them outside. But Reynolds knew this was just one location. If Voss had been right about this place, then there were more. A bigger threat. Back at the station, the rescued children were given medical attention while the arrested traffickers were processed. But there was one major problem. None of them were talking. These guys aren't low-level, Lawson said, studying their records. They're professionals. They won't crack easily. Reynolds clenched his fists. Then we need to go higher up the chain. And that's when the unexpected happened. One of the traffickers, an older man with graying hair, requested to speak with Reynolds. When Reynolds entered the room, the man smirked. You think you're winning? He asked. You're not even close. Reynolds didn't react. Enlighten me. The man leaned forward. You cut off a limb, but the body survives. You think this operation is big. You have no idea how deep it goes. Reynolds stared at him. Then tell me. The man chuckled. Oh, I will. But not for free. The price of information. It was a dangerous game. Criminals like this didn't talk unless they had something to gain. What do you want? Reynolds asked. The man's smile widened. Protection. Full immunity. And a new identity. Reynolds' stomach turned. There was no way they could offer that, not when children's lives were at stake. I can give you everything, the man continued. Names, locations, the leader of the operation. Lawson, who had been listening through the speaker, entered the room. You expect us to just let you walk? The man shrugged. I expect you to do whatever it takes to stop this. Isn't that what you want? Reynolds exchanged a glance with Lawson. They had a choice, stick to protocol or risk everything for the bigger picture. And then, the man dropped a bombshell. The next transfer is happening in 48 hours, he said. You stop it, you save lives. You miss it. You'll never find them again. Reynolds knew then that they had no choice. The final countdown. With time running out, the department scrambled to verify the man's claims. After hours of searching, they confirmed it. An abandoned warehouse by the docks had been rented under a fake name, and it matched previous trafficking patterns. Reynolds, Lawson, and an elite SWAT team prepared for the biggest operation yet. If we do this right, we take down the entire network, Lawson said. Reynolds nodded. Then we don't fail. As they geared up, a sense of dread settled over them. This was it. The final battle was about to begin. Officer Daniel Reynolds stood outside the abandoned warehouse, the cold night air heavy with tension. The operation had been meticulously planned, every possible escape route covered, every officer briefed on what to expect. But deep down, he knew that nothing about this mission was predictable. Inside that warehouse, traffickers were preparing to transfer a group of children to an unknown buyer. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the final chance to bring down the entire operation. 30 seconds, Detective Sarah Lawson whispered through the comms. The tactical team was in position. Reynolds took a deep breath. On my signal. He raised his hand. 3, 2, 1. Move in. The final raid. The front doors exploded inward as officers stormed the warehouse. Gunfire erupted immediately, traffickers scrambling to defend their operation. Reynolds sprinted forward, dodging between stacks of crates. He saw a group of terrified children being herded toward a black SUV. Stop them, he shouted. Lawson and another officer cut off the escape, taking down 2 men who tried to flee. One of them reached for his gun, but Reynolds was faster. A single shot rang out, and the trafficker collapsed. Screams echoed through the warehouse. Reynolds spotted a tall man in a suit, standing calmly in the chaos. The leader. Their eyes locked. And then, the man ran. The chase. Reynolds didn't hesitate. He bolted after him, weaving through the warehouse, up a flight of metal stairs. The suspect burst onto the rooftop, sprinting toward the edge where a waiting helicopter hovered. Oh, no you don't, Reynolds growled. He pushed harder, closing the gap just as the man grabbed onto the helicopter's ladder. With one final burst of strength, Reynolds lunged, grabbing the man's ankle. The helicopter lifted off, but Reynolds held on tight. Let go, the man shouted, kicking wildly. Reynolds gritted his teeth. With one swift motion, he yanked the man down. The suspect tumbled onto the rooftop, gasping in pain. The helicopter, unable to wait, veered away into the night. Reynolds pinned the man to the ground. It's over. The trafficker sneered. You think this ends with me? Reynolds pressed harder. You're damn right it does. Justice served. Back at the station, the aftermath of the raid was overwhelming. 23 children were rescued. The traffickers were arrested, including their leader, Marcus Vale, a wealthy businessman who had been secretly running the operation for years. Reynolds watched as Vale was led away in handcuffs. You'll never walk free again. Vale smirked. There will always be more. Reynolds didn't flinch. And we'll always be there to stop them. The emotional reunion. As dawn broke, Reynolds found himself in a quiet hospital room. The rescued children were being reunited with their families. A young boy, no older than 8, ran into his mother's arms, sobbing. "I thought I'd never see you again." Tears streamed down her face. "You're home now." Reynolds turned away, blinking back emotion. This was why he did this. One last surprise. As he walked outside, a familiar sound caught his attention, a bark. He turned to see the same lost dog that had led him to this case in the first place. The golden retriever wagged its tail, staring up at him. Reynolds crouched down, scratching behind its ears. "You started all this, didn't you?" The dog licked his face. Lawson chuckled. "Looks like he's yours now." Reynolds exhaled. "Guess I could use a new partner." As he stood, watching the sunrise, he knew one thing for certain. Justice had been served. And thanks to a lost dog, countless lives had been saved. The end.